Welcome back to the Missing Touch YouTube channel. Today I wanted to talk about missing futures and lost futures. Futures that I've had planned out in my life that I really wanted to accomplish. Futures that I had, for example, where I wanted to be an artist. Someone that worked in the concept and illustration fields, where I would be able to work at a company for a long time and be able to sketch out characters or landscapes or environments and work in game development and entertainment. And I spent a very, very long time doing this. And that never came to be. There's a lost future, and it's a not a goal anymore. It's something I had to give up as a part of my learning journey, and it's unfortunate. Before I talk about whether something like being an artist was ever a positive or a potential goal that could have been accomplished, what I want to talk about is, how I got started. And I, just started art as a hobby at 13 years old. I, would take sketchbooks when I was 13 and I would just doodle in them. I remember having the idea of thinking that poetry would be something interesting, but then I tried some writing in my creative writing class. I want to say in fifth or sixth grade, and the idea was fun. It was interesting, but I wanted to tell stories. But writing itself just was did not come naturally for me, especially fiction. Obviously, it wouldn't be till much later that I realized that nonfiction, came a lot easier for me. Um, but I still wanted to tell stories, and so I asked my parents for some sketchbooks and for some pencils. And what eventually happened is I got some ideas of what I wanted to tell, and those became characters, and those became short stories that I would draw down in the visual format. And obviously, the drawings were not good. And a lot of the stories that I wrote and drew out were very generic, and copies of shows I had seen and stories I had already read. But that's, very typical of a teenager. It wasn't until much later that I had actually learned, from looking at online books and YouTube videos what the fundamentals of art were. So I began to realize, okay, there is such a thing as gesture drawing and composition and anatomy. And, there's a way to put all of these components together into a finished illustration and to have characters placed in a setting. And okay, you want to be able to draw backgrounds and have your characters performing some type of action or movement to tell a narrative in the illustration. And I did that for a little bit, as an older teenager, trying to practice, what I wanted to do. Of course, a lot of my artwork was nothing special. I was still learning about, what it meant to tell a story through an image. This is also about the time where I began to realize, who are my favorite artists and who should I learn from. So I began to learn from artists like Frank Frazetta, Bulgaro, Caravaggio, Kim Jung-gi, Steve Houston, Togashi, a bunch of artists. And to this day, they're still some of my favorite. And that's, I still, of course, draw as a hobby, and I still look to them as being some of my favorite, most influential artists to this day. So that didn't go away. What did go away eventually would be, art as a passion, art as something to look forward to, as a goal or a dream, to accomplish, to be professionally. It sounds dumb to maybe some people that are listening right now, like, that, I need to pursue something more professional, something that's more attainable and realistic, and but I was never told this as a teenager. I was never told this as a kid because I really didn't have any guidance, especially, the adult figures I had in my life, you know, they they sort of expected me to think like an adult as soon as I was a teenager, Well, why don't you just know these things, So it was almost like as if they didn't really want to show me or teach me anything. It was more so, it was just expected that I know that the arts had a lot of problems, on the inside, and that it was just something that it would be not that great of an idea to get into. And it doesn't help that I was constantly listening to people like Steven Silver and Trent Canigua on YouTube. I did take Steven Silver's class over on schoolism.com, which was helpful. I did get feedback and critique on what to improve, and he did tell me, that there was a lot of my work that needed to be improved upon, particularly when it came to character design, the way I draw characters. This was also a period where I was very obsessed with rendering and having everything look very polished and neat, and not so much really caring about the actual design. So I would make a mock-up of a character and really focus in on the quality of the skin and the hair and the clothing and make sure it looked very very nice, but I didn't actually put any emphasis on the design of the clothing, the fabric, the hat, the hair, the eye color, and stuff like that. So that because that was more of a background to me, I didn't really necessarily care about that. I just cared about, well, how realistic can I get it to look? How much texture can I put into it? So my priorities were all wrong from the start when it came to that particular class. This is also a period where I was very vulnerable and young. I was, I want to say 19, 20, and I loved confirmation bias. I loved it. I would look at all these graphs of successful people that didn't go to college, and these were artists. So, as I mentioned, Steven Silver, there were a couple other artists that were notable for saying, don't go to college, it's a scam. Don't go to art school, it's a scam. Be like me and just go straight to DreamWorks, go straight to Disney and get a job. As if it was that easy, right? And yet I never considered the fact that, these were guys all the way back in the 80s and 90s, where something like that was possible. Or being able to go to DC or Marvel, back in the day, was, and work your way up was actually, possible, but not now. But I kept my head buried in the sand, and Trent was someone that was very, very vocal that capitalism worked. That, if you just worked hard enough like I did, you'll make it, and sure, he gave lip service to the fact that the industry is much different, compared to his day when he was younger. Because, this is a guy that, is in his 50s now compared to when I was, quote unquote, just starting out at 19, 20 watching his YouTube videos. And now I'm 28, and look where I am. I'm a complete failure, right? But he was still insistent, so I am at, late teenage, young adult years, listening to Trent Canigua, and his advice, is not, systemic. It's completely individual based. It's you. You have to work harder than the rest of the competition. I remember that from one of his videos. And I took that advice to heart, and it it's he never talked about supply and demand, and that's something I'm gonna get into now. But of course, a young person is not gonna think about supply and demand. The fact that everyone wanted to be an artist, everyone online, had a portfolio. Everyone online wanted to work in concept art because it was the big thing. Illustration, that was a big thing. Character design, everyone wanted to, because anime and gaming and everything else in between was just so huge. It was just so huge, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie. They all wanted to work in that because it's fun. It's fun, and of course, the internet gave rise to indie gaming, gave rise to indie web comics. And you could get work within that as well. But the competition, grew even wider and wider with all that as well, right? So I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I went to art school for about 2 semesters. And some of you might be saying, "Well, 2 semesters, that's not too bad." It's really not. But this school, which I won't mention, it's a scam. It's a big scam because a lot of it they want you to go there for 4 years, right? And none of it has anything to do with preparing you for the industry. I had a woodshop class, for crying out loud. That, I mean, no one that's working in 3D animation, no one that's working in storyboarding is ever going to be required to do woodshop. So why am I carving postmodern wooden sculptures? That has nothing to do with anything related to the field. And I went to school during 2016. So my first semester started during the election of Donald Trump. And I remember being there in my room, seeing the president at the time, Donald Trump, get sworn in. And I was probably one of the only supporters of his. And, well, I'm not obviously a supporter of his anymore, but everyone else hated him. We even, in fact, got an email offering counseling services for those that were supporters of Hillary at the time, right? So you get an idea of the environment I was in. I even remember a poster for an anti-Trump event that the school was hosting. Maybe not sponsored by, or whatever, but it was a strong, powerful black woman holding Trump's severed head in her arm. And I remember just the feeling of being so alone and scared. Just like this is me. Like it felt like a direct assault on the voters, and I did take it personally. This is also during the rise of the alt right with the likes of Richard Spencer, and then of course you would get into people like the right stuff biz. Jared Taylor would become prominent with American Renaissance, and so I fell in with that crowd. Right, I'll make another video on that subject much later, but yeah. So for a while, I was a bit confused about my own identity as someone who is only half white, and so, but I did have a bit of an identity crisis. At the same time, though, I was a bit of an edgelord, because Trump had just won. I had voted for him, and I felt a bit proud. And yeah, so my language, was a bit not abrasive, but it was just edgy. It was just edgy. There was a lot of at the time it would have been called ironic racism. It would have been edgy humor and stuff like that. But that drew the line. That drew the line, and so a lot of the jokes that I had made obviously was being heard in class, and so they got Title IX to come at me. And so I would have multiple meetings with the people at Title IX. I would have to apologize. I would have to say, like, look, I'm not an actual racist, blah, blah, blah. These were just jokes that I thought were harmless. And yeah, so I felt very uncomfortable. I got death threats, like actual death threats. I got people wishing me to kill myself. I had people that didn't want me in the classroom. Uh, yeah, and I didn't get like yeah as far as like critiques or whatever because like it was part of the class. Yeah, no, it was just like a humiliation ritual because no one wanted me in the classrooms anymore. So my only option left was to leave. So yeah, and some people are going to say like, oh, the art community is very liberal in the first place. Most of the movies you see in Hollywood, those are very liberal. Most of the books you read, they're very liberal. The best ones, are very liberal. And to a certain extent, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, I do think that there is, I don't know if I call it a demand, but there are, conservative, quote unquote, artists out there that it's just that they're a small minority of artists, and they just don't have, a platform or voice because we're so small. And, it's not so much that I don't call myself an artist anymore. There's really no point in me being an artist. It's just that I don't have anyone to hear my voice, you know, and I'm not. There's no way of me ever making a profit with my art. There's no way of me ever being validated as an artist, So I'm not going to call myself an artist, especially someone that was to ever make political art or fantasy art or science fiction that happened to have a political or religious message to it. Especially now that I've matured, you know, but at the same time, like I've lost all motivation, I've lost all hope to ever be, a professional storyteller or a professional artist, in the field. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so I just gave up. And that's why, I went back to school, community college to work in computer science. It's more of a realistic uh, job. It's more of a realistic chance for me to actually get a career going. But, I still have that inkling inside me that I want to work in the arts. I still have that creative spirit within me that wants to do something, to say something. That's part of the reason I got this channel. That's part of the reason I have this blog. But at the same time, there's a part of me that says like it just won't happen. I'll never be an artist. I'll never be someone with anything noteworthy to really say. And it makes me question whether anyone really cares about what I say at the end of the day. There's going to be other artists on, DeviantArt, 4chan, Discord saying, just draw for yourself, just enjoy the hobby for what it is. You don't have to get validation from other people. You don't have to get validation from commissions or people commenting saying they like your work. You can just draw whatever it is that you want. You can keep it to yourself and, just enjoy the hobby. And to that I say that's wrong. That's wrong in the sense that, take anything else. Take anything like bodybuilding. Why do people bodybuild? Why do people get into fitness? Why do people get into running or whatever? It's because they want a better body. And they don't want a better body because it makes them feel good or because they like the high or because they feel good about it. It's because they want validation from other people. They want other people telling them, hey, you look good. Hey, I find you attractive. Hey, you look so great that you lost so much weight. Do you want to go out on a date with me? They want compliments from other people. They want other people to notice them. They want strangers eyeballing them up and down. Same goes for labor. People do jobs they hate not because they like the work or because they believe that the work itself is so wonderful or whatever, or because it contributes to the GDP or because it contributes better to society, but because they have kids, because they have a family to provide for, because they have an obligation to pay off their mortgage and pay off their student loans, and because they have someone or something they care about, even if it's like their dog or their elderly parents or whatever. I tried to explain this to my parents at one point. They were so confused as to why I wasn't motivated to push myself further at work. They were confused so much as to why I was depressed and why it felt like I wasn't going hard enough at life. And I said to my Mom, when you were at work at this job that you hated, you did it because you got validation. You did it because you had my sister and I to take care of. And you pushed yourself and you went to school because you cared for us, because you had us to look after, because you wanted more for us, because you wanted it better for us. I work a very humiliating job as a janitor. I get less than the minimum wage, or just barely the minimum wage. I come home and I sit down on my computer, I play some games on Steam, I record YouTube videos, and I try and reach out to people, but other than that, I have no one in my life. Last I checked, I don't have anyone that's excited to see me. I don't have anyone that's thinking about me like, oh, I wonder what Midwest is doing. And I don't have anyone's smile to look at, when I wake up in the morning. I don't have anyone that's so excited to see me, and I'm not excited to see anyone, right? So, like, when it comes to my work, I'm just going to put in the bare minimum. I have no reason to push myself further. I have no reason to exceed the expectations because I just don't care. I don't care, and it just doesn't matter. Being a janitor doesn't require much work, so I'm just going to do what I can to barely get by. I have no reason to push myself further because I don't have much to take care of. If I don't care about myself, why would I go the extra step? I was talking to someone on Telegram the other day about a regular we had at my last job. This was a customer that I got to know his name and I got to know a little bit more about his background because he'd come in every day and we just chat for a little bit. I won't say his real name, but I'll give a fake name for the sake of this story. So let's just say his name is Brendan, right? Good guy, not too bad. But he did not have much to really say much about his life, right? As far as what he had going for himself, he had what we call day labor, which is basically finding any work available that barely paid anything, and he'd just come home and drink. Brendan was 30, and he lived with his brother, and his brother was very abusive towards him, And Brendan's brother also had a girlfriend, which who was schizophrenic and would go off her meds and just throw the most violent tantrums that I can imagine. Because she came to our store once and she was off her meds and she almost got extremely violent. She pretended to have a gun, which scared all of us. And so I ended up calling the cops, and she ended up getting arrested. So imagine being this guy having to live with those two people, and your only cope is to just go out and drink, with your buddies. And they're not, even real friends. They're just, people that you drink with. You might be asking, well, why are you telling this story? Like, what does this have to do with anything? The reason I'm telling this story right now is because I do feel for Brendan, and I think what happens is he represents the vast majority of people I've lived with throughout my life. They don't really have many aspirations. They just go to work and they drink themselves to sleep, and that's it. They don't know how to cope with trauma. They have terrible life situations throughout their childhood or whatever. They have unresolved trauma, and so they take it out on their kids, they take it out on their wives, whatever. I'm a product of that. Now, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't work backbreaking labor, right? I try to be a good Catholic, and it's much easier said than it is done. But I feel like Brendan would have it much easier in life if he had an example to live by. If he had someone in his life that could show him that there is more to life than just drinking and taking out his anxiety, by going out to the drugstore and just buying more alcohol and smoking and just, wanting to waste his life away. Last I checked, he was not a violent person, and last I talked to him, he didn't have any record or whatever. I think this is also part of the reason why, like, it was never in the stars for me to ever be an artist, because just look at the people I grew up with, look at the people that were in my surrounding community. None of them cared about, the arts or literature or psychology or anthropology, theology, whatever. It never occurred to them that this could be an interesting subject to pursue deeply in, to really dive deep into, and really think that it could be beneficial to them. They've been conditioned to believe that the only thing meaningful in life is just hedonism and money and status. And I'm the complete opposite. I'm totally content being a virgin. I'm totally content, living very minimally. I'm I'm very different. I'll put it like that. I'm very different from everyone else in my community. I think the people that are successful in the arts, people that were successful comic book artists, or people that were able to get their novels published, or people that were able to get in the game industry or whatever. I believe that a lot of times it's not so much just working hard or whatever. These platitudes that conservatives and baby boomers love. I think it's the fact that they had someone in their life that was able to guide them, and the fact that they had maybe an atmosphere that was able to produce creativity, that was able to inspire and motivate. They probably were able to be around people that were also creative and give them ideas and actually motivate them and keep them going. The fact that they were able to be validated by other people, saying, "Hey, I like where you're going. Keep going at it. I'll help you. I'll help you learn these skills. I'll help you financially. I'll spread the word about this new game you got going. It looks great. That new art piece you just did, yeah, let's get it in this gallery. It looks fantastic. Oh, you got that new concept art portfolio going? Hey, let me reach out to this buddy of mine. He works in a concept art studio. Let me see if I can get you in a house." I think that's something that just is not talked about, and I think there's a lot of ugly truths to the arts, and I think the YouTube algorithm and all these nasty influencers are just gaslighting you and saying, like, yeah, well, oh, it's the style you draw in, or it's the coloring or whatever, or you're not drawing the right subjects, and they're just lying to you. They're just lying to you, and they're just saying that it's your fault. Everything you do is your fault, and you just need to network, and you need to work harder, and you need to paint different subjects. So I know this video went on a few different tangents. I think that's okay, for the discussion, that, this video will produce. I'm not going to post any of my artwork, past, old, or whatever, because, it might link back to some of my old accounts that have my actual name on it. So I'll just put up a random still for the thumbnail. It might be fun to do like a drawing live stream, so maybe something like that will be in the future if that's something that interests you guys. But other than that, I'm not completely done with drawing. It still is a fun hobby, and lately I've been trying to, get into more humorous drawings, rather than, something serious, so drawing for fun and stuff like that, with other people I meet on Discord and stuff like that, so that's kind of, bringing back some of the motivation. Um, and I think, for people in the black pill space, I do think that creativity is something that's important. I do think having an outlet, whether it's not just YouTube, but anything else, people, especially here, should be engaging the mind in a way that's fulfilling. There's the old saying that the mind is a terrible thing to waste. And I do believe that a lot of the people in the black pill do have a lot to say, that they do have a lot to think about and ponder and to share. And, by getting addicted to alcohol or substances is sort of a waste, and it's a waste of a mind that, could be used to share new ideas and to be, a part of a community. And so I really do advocate that, especially us here, we need to be mindful of what it is that we do and what we partake in, so we can get together and be there for each other and improve each other's lives and know that it doesn't have to be so bad.